Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi mahana kia koutou, I runga I te kaupapa o te rānei, Nisan Bolivinaka, veke muni kewe, mālo le soifua, malalangi e mamā. Ko tararua te maunga, ko ōhau, ko ōtaki ngā awa, ko Ngāti Raukawa, ko tūhaurangi ngā iwi, ko kikopiri te marae me te hapu, ki te taha o tōku mātua, no ōtaki a hau. Ki te taha o tōku whaia, no whiti, no savusavu a hau. Ki te taha o tōku tāne me aku tamariki kei te hono a hau ki Hāmoa. So, did you catch all that in Te Reo Māori? So just, it's very usual for us as Indigenous peoples to say who we are and where we come from when we come to a gathering like this to speak. And I want to thank you for staying this long. It's been a long day. In fact, this morning I thought I was in the wrong conference, but this afternoon I felt a little bit more at home. But most of my work is in the Indigenous language space, really working hard in the revitalisation area in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I want to talk to you about that today. So I really like this proverb from Hawaii. Ao he pau ka ike I ka halau ho'okai. Not all knowledge is learned in one school. And so I think we have to recognise that even our university system is a colonised system. And even this idea of kind of analysing our languages in this great sea of islands from an outsider perspective only tells part of the story. So I think for us as Indigenous peoples, it's really important to have our voice in the stories that are told. Because I think the people who own the languages that are being spoken about, they know the depth of the meaning of the language, not just the surface features and the syntax of the language, but actually what the depth of the meaning of the vocabulary and how the language is used in the society in which it is birthed and continues to live. And so for us as Māori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, this is a very well-known whakatauki. E kore au e ngaro he kākano I ruia mai I rangiatea. And if you don't know what it means this: I will never be lost. I am a seed sown in rangiatea. So for Indigenous Māori, we recognise that we come from rangiatea. Do you know where rangiatea is? It is Raiatea. It is Hawaii. We talk about going back to Hawaii. It is Hawaii. It is Savaii. So these are places that our people came from. So we sailed deliberately on what is called in Samoa Vaatele, in Tongan Tongiaki, in Te Reo Māori Wakahaurua, in Fijian Ndrua. So we sailed deliberately on these double-hull deep-sea canoes using the stars, the waves, the birds, the currents. And it was not by mistake that really Polynesian people are the greatest seafarers in the world. I am biased, I must say. And so those words, tupuna, kaumātua, mātua, mokopuna, you know, those words speak of familial relationships, ancestors, grandparents or elders, parents and grandchildren. So our valued knowledge is passed through generations, and those relationships across generations are essential to revitalising not only our language, but the cultural knowledge that is encoded in the languages that we speak. And so for many of you, you know, you refer to the Polynesian triangle. For us, we refer to it as a whānau. Whānau in Te Reo Māori means family, whānau in Samoan and in other Polynesian languages, whānau meaning home. And so E Peli Hauofa talked about our great sea of islands as one continent. And so we are one family. If we think from an Indigenous perspective, we are unique. We come from unique places, but we are also interconnected familially. We have deep ancestral connections to our places of origin in the Pacific. And so, sorry, the fonts have changed a little bit here, but one of our tupuna, Sir James Henare, he said, ko te reo te Māori o te mana Māori, ko te kupu te Māori o te reo Māori. The language is the life force of mana Māori. The word is the life force of the language. Ko te reo no te atua mai, a language which is a gift to us from God. And so these ideas are deeply embedded in the psyche or the Māori of us as Indigenous peoples, that you can't separate the language from the culture, from identity. They are all interconnected. And if we lose our language, we lose much of what is inherent in our culture, because it is the language that is the vehicle for carrying the culture. And so here's another whakatauki or proverb. Ko taku reo, taku oho oho, ko taku reo, taku māpihi maurea. My language is my awakening. My language is the window to my soul. And I thought this was interesting. To have another language is to possess a second soul. We get a window into the worldview of the people who own that language that we learn. So normally when we as Māori introduce ourselves, we sing a waiata or a song. I'm losing my voice, so I want to just briefly sing this for you because it's a modern waiata. It's kind of been in the Māori top 10 for a few years. But it draws from that ancient proverb or whakatauki. It goes like this. He kaka no ahau, I rui a mai, I rangi a te a. And I will never be lost, I am a seed, born of greatness, descended from a line of chiefs. He kaka no ahau. It does go on, and I won't sing it all, but just have a read of the translation there. Wherever I may roam, I will hold fast to my traditions. My language is my cherished possession. My language is the object of my affection, my precious adornment. My language is my strength and ornament of grace. So these are ideas that are embedded in Te Reo Māori, but also in many of our Pacific languages. And so here is a voice from a young woman who I interviewed. And so even for our young people, they also feel the deep connection to language. She talks about how it is interconnected with culture and how there are certain words in Samoan and Māori that express what I mean so much better than when I try to say it in English. Basically, the English translation is not adequate for some Samoan or Māori words. And so I was really interested this afternoon to hear somebody talk about one of the people groups talking about the interconnection with land, that language and people are spiritually connected to the land on which they are born. And some of our Indigenous writers have written about that. Our leadership and direction emerge from the land up. Our commitment and tenacity spring from our deep connection to the land. And so I want to tell you just a quick story that illustrates this connection with land. So for us in Aotearoa, we've been fighting for many years now for our Indigenous history to be taught in our schools. And it is only just in the last month or so that it has been mandated that our Indigenous history and our colonial history between tangata whenua, Indigenous peoples, and the settler peoples will now be taught officially in school. But this story comes from near my tribal area, and many of the place names were named by one man called Haunui Ananaia, and he was the grandson of Kupe, who was the person who discovered Aotearoa well before Captain Cook did, and it was his wife who called out Aotearoa. So look at the long white cloud, and that was how we got our name. But Haunui Ananaia, he left from a place called Whanganui, and he went searching for his errant wife. And so he left this place, he called it the Big Bay, Whanganui. There it is. And when he got to the Rangitike River, he was taking big strides. That's what that word means, to get across the river. 10 minutes? Okay. And then when he got to Turakina, he had to go across a log to ford that river. That's what that word means. And when he got to Manawatu, that river, the river was so cold that his heart stood still. Manawa, your heart too, to stand still. And when he got to Oho, where my marae is, he named that place after himself, the place of hope. And when he got to Otaki, he put his staff in the ground and he said, this is the place where I put my staff. Taki is staff. And when he got to Waikanai, he noticed the river and the mullet that were shimmering in the water water of the kanai, the water of the mullet. And then when he got to Remutaka, he looked from Remutaka, he sat down and he surveyed the scene. And that's what that word means. And while he was there, the Wairarapa, the water from the Wairarapa made his eyes glisten. Wairarapa, the glistening of the water. And then when he got to a place called Tauwhare Niko, he looked and there was a house made of Niko leaves and he named it that place. And when he got to the Waiawangawanga or the Waingawa, he noticed that it was a braided river and so he named it that. So you can see this is just one example of our names that are deeply connected to our tupuna, our ancestors and our histories. And when I was speaking at a literacy conference last year, it was interesting that I really felt to talk about this, the role of prior knowledge. And, you know, the fact that many of our Pacific learners in Aotearoa, New Zealand are required to display their prior knowledge in English only when they're in English medium classrooms, when in fact they may have knowledge encoded in their heritage language, or possibly even in Pacific English, which may be a register or variety of English that they speak, which is different to school English. And so we need to create space for them to access that. When I went to this conference, it was interesting that in Palmerston North, it's surrounded by wind turbines. The name of the conference was Literacy Landscapes, and they focused on wind turbines as telling the story of that landscape without knowing any of that Indigenous history or storying that I've just quickly told you. And we see this all the time with reading books for children. One time a teacher held this book up and she said to all the Pacific children in her class, what do you think the book's about? And the Pacific children said, it's about praising the Lord, nothing to do with wind power. They were using their prior knowledge to make connections with that image. And so we've all been colonized in the Pacific. Here's a photo from Samoa and the Mau movement where Mataafa was killed. So these histories are deeply embedded in our Pacific people. And New Zealand is very much connected to the Pacific, both through pre-colonial, which I've explained to you, but also post-colonial connections. So 3 of our Pacific nations, Tokelau, Niue, Cook Islands, are part of the constitutional realm of Aotearoa, New Zealand, but many New Zealanders do not know that. And so we have constitutional relationships that have been based on what has happened in the past. New Zealand's administration of Samoa from 1914 to 1962, and many others that I don't have time to tell you. And so Damon Salesa, who's one of our professors in Indigenous Pacific Studies, talks about how Aotearoa will increasingly become browner and is becoming browner. And so New Zealand is a nation that is actually a Pacific island, but many white New Zealanders don't see themselves as Pacific Islanders. And so just a quick look at the census here. Samoan, Cook Islands Māori, Tongan, Niuean, Tokelauan and Fijian were the largest groups after European, Indigenous Māori and Chinese. And so this census data is quite old. We're still waiting on our latest census data, but probably Pacific peoples are up to around 9%. There's a lot of collecting of Pacific voice of late. So here's a document from the Ministry of Pacific Peoples, and all Pacific peoples are saying, we want our language and culture to be central to what our children learn at school. We want it to be embedded in what they learn. I might just talk for another 5 minutes and have less question time, if that's okay. And so these are some of the voices that have been collected from the Education Department. There's very few Pacific bilingual education units, very few. Probably 30 nationwide, predominantly Samoan. So most Pacific children are in English medium education, where they are endeavouring to support teachers to become more culturally competent. And so in Auckland, it's becoming increasingly diverse, but only 37% and 58% of schools intentionally promoted learning by using a home language or cultural lens. So still some way to go. This is just my doctoral work, which I don't have time to talk about. So perhaps I won't talk about that either because, oh, it's only 22. Can I go till 10 to? I started at 25 past. Yeah, so I've got 10 minutes. Okay, so these ideas, you know, the concepts of interlanguage, language competence, fossilization has framed the SL research field inextricably in relation to monolingual speaker norms. Monolingual bias occurs because the notion of monolingual norms as an invariant standard presupposes monolingualism to be the unmarked, unexamined category and native speaker competence to be a uniform benchmark in relation to second language learning. In so doing, the bi or multilingual repertoires of learners were, in Katru's view, either ignored or perceived in explicitly deficit terms. So too were the fluid and overlapping language uses and related linguistic and sociocultural competencies of multilingual communities. So this idea of teaching for transfer in multilingual schools is something that we're really working in. So I work with a lot of practicing teachers in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, and I project direct a Ministry of Education project which is focused on using Pasifika dual language books in 5 languages: Ngangana Samoa, Ngangana Tokelau, Te Reo Māori Koki Airani, Wangahau Niue, and Leo Whakatonga, those 5 languages. So based on the constitutional connections. And so this idea of normalizing multilingualism in English medium classrooms is becoming more and more of a focus of our ministry and certainly of the work that I'm involved in, supporting teachers to encourage children to translanguage. So originally coined by Ken Williams in Wales, receiving input in one language and outputting in another language. So recognizing that this fluidity of language use happens naturally for many bilinguals. And so these are just some of the books that we've been trialing in schools with teachers. And most of the teachers are not speakers of these languages. Many of them are Palangi teachers, only a few Pacific teachers. There's a website you can look at if you're interested. You just Google Pasifika dual language books. They're all there. And so some of the things we do is support teachers to see the connections between our Pacific languages. So here's just one example with the numbers from 1 to 10. And we see that actually we are interconnected, not only in our histories and our stories of migration, but also in our languages, as you experts all know. And here's another example, giving teachers question starters in Pacific languages that their children will be able to use in their reading programs. So here's an example of a book, where a dual language book in both Samoan and English. And here is an example of children who have taken that book and told their own story that relates to the story in the book. So these Tongan children created their own Tongan wall story, bilingual word story really, to tell the story of that book. So for us, you know, our languages are inextricably connected to our hearts. We have what we call Pacific heart languages. things that we can express only in our language that cannot be readily translated in English, and many of our own literacy practices that are embedded in our languages. And we talk about talanoa, and here's just another example of drawing on the multiple registers that children bring with them, not only their knowledge of their heritage language, but also their register or variety of Pacific English. And so I have to stop now, so I won't do that. I'll just go right to the end. I won't be able to show my maps for you, but never mind. Perhaps the last thing I'll just say is that the culture of the child cannot enter the classroom until it has first entered the consciousness of the teacher. Kia ora koutou. Sorry if I've gone over time. Oh, 4:45, still plenty of time. I raced through because I was told to stop. Any questions? Yes.
Hello, thanks for this lovely presentation. I was wondering, so you just finished your presentation saying that so the consciousness has to enter the teacher's mind. And I'm wondering about your take on the children's consciousness. So the place where I am working, I'm working with bilingual speakers, and I have somehow found out that they don't really know. So what's your take on that? Is there a meta language that you develop or work with, or what do you do? Like, what's...
I'm not quite understanding your question.
All right. So bilingualism and multilingualism isn't necessarily something people are aware of, is my finding, my recent finding, shocking finding. And I was wondering, when you're talking about teaching a bilingual, at a bilingual school, bilingual children, are they aware about this? Is this something?
You mean the teachers or the children?
The children.
The children generally tend to think school is for English, home is for heritage language, or might be the Pacific Register of English that they speak if they're second or third generation. So really it's the teacher who has the power in the classroom to change that discourse. And so if the teacher starts creating space and encouraging children to bring all of their language resources into the classroom, it really changes the children. I didn't have time to share my data with you, but the incredible impact on children and families has been phenomenal. We're now getting families coming to teachers and demanding more books because they're so excited about the impact not only on their children's languaging in their Pacific language, but also the impact on their English literacy. It is, of course, having beneficial impacts on both. So because classrooms are domains where teachers have power, when they change the discourse, it immediately has an impact on the children who own those languages. Yeah.
And what about the parents?
Well, huge impact, because we've also been running parent meetings where we share these ideas. So many of our parents have been colonised and believe that the only way to be successful is through English. So when we talk about actually your children will be more successful at acquiring English if they maintain their heritage language, it has a very emotional impact on many parents who have experienced colonisation, and then often sets them on their own revitalising of their language journey. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi. I'm just wondering what the responses have been from the teachers. You mentioned that some of them are working in language when it's not their own. Has it been positive, or has there been any pushback from that?
Yeah, so a lot of them have needed a lot of support and scaffolding, and initially they felt very insecure about reading books in languages that they were not speakers of, but there are digital sound files that help them to do that. And then when they give it a go, so it's very much co-constructed with them. we say just do whatever you feel you're able to do, even if that's only reading the text in English and sending it home for the family to read the Pacific version. But actually most of them want to have a go in the Pacific language. And when they see the impact of what they do in the classroom on those children, they are immediately invested in it. They are so excited. Many of them talk about the incredible impact that it has had on the children and how so much more invested in reading and in school they are than they ever were before. So actually, if you can just get them to have a go, the impact on the children speaks for itself. And then they're on that journey, which is really cool. Yeah.